What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celios Network. Today I wanted to talk to you about some of the ways I metagame. Metagaming being trying to predict what other people are going to play in their decks to a tournament and what strategies they are going to try to use to win the game, and how I could use counter strategies or my own undiscovered strategies to get an upper hand. The game inside of the game, or the game outside of the game, even. Your deck lists and your deck that you choose to play, your archetype, things that don't change once you actually get into the actual gameplay of the game. I've said game and I've said meta. Those words I've said a lot now. They're probably starting to not sound like real words to you. And this graph that I have not explained is still on your screen. So let's get shouting out my sponsors out of the way, and then I'll tell you what this is all about. And my sponsors were supposed to come up now. Oh, good. Hang on. There they are. PotownStore.com, the best place to get PTCGO codes, and CardTrooperGames.com, my favorite place to pre-order my Pokemon TCG booster boxes. Use code Celio at 5% off at both of those. If you're watching this video as soon as it came out, Card Trooper Games, the code might not be working, but I'm trying to get that fixed. Dragon Shield sleeves, my favorite sleeves. I'm happy to be working with so many of my favorites sponsoring this channel. Dragon Shield sleeves are great. I have affiliate links in the description down below. Beast Coast Pokemon, big things coming for Beast Coast Pokemon. Go give us a sub over on YouTube. You'll love us. And PokemonCard.io, the best place for viewing, sharing, and creating your Pokemon TCG deck lists. Also, give me a sub here on the channel. And are my slides working now? Perfect. Okay, so before we hop into this is all theory. Some players may play against 9 of the same deck, others will play against 9 different decks. There is variance in this, but this theory is assuming you won't be an outlier and you will have an average spread of matchups, whatever you determine that average to be. Also, very important, work on your fundamental skills before spending time on metagaming. Most players should spend more time practicing and less time metagaming and theorizing, in my opinion. If you feel you've mastered your deck, which you probably haven't, let's get to metagaming. So we have this graph back. Now, this is going to be especially for a larger size tournament where averages really start to pan out. So we're going to be using the 2022 Baltimore, Maryland regionals in North America that is coming up in a couple of weeks. There should be around 1,000 masters playing in this event, so it's great, a great sample size for something like this. Imagine the bar graph as the population of the event, and I'm breaking it into 3 sections: the lower 10%, the upper 15%, and the middle 75%. Now, you could say that it goes from lowest to highest, from the left of the screen to the right of the screen, being from the newest players to the oldest players, the lesser experienced to the more experienced, the worst to the best. It's also going to be the most prepared, and the also how competitive these players are, how much time they put into it, how much they're expecting to get out of it. Pretty much the more prepared players towards the right, the lesser prepared players towards the left, and also how much they really care is going to depict what decks they are selecting from. So the bottom 10% is going to be the players, maybe this is their first regional, maybe they're there with a friend or a significant other, maybe they're a parent of a kid playing in a younger division. This lower 10% of what I estimate it to be can range from anything from a theme deck straight out of the box with no sleeves to just a rogue pet deck they've been playing at League or they've been playing at home. Some of these players perform. So um this is definitely not to say players down here can't make day 2 or can't win championship points or can't win the event, because that's not what it is. This is to try to depict what kind of decks they might be selecting from and how these decks make it into the overall ending metagame report. So this lower 10% is kind of the other, when you say you'll never know what you can hit at a regional championships, things like that are going to be down here. Maybe decks that aren't optimized to the metagame's liking or to Twitter's liking or something, but they might have a card in there that nobody else is playing that they'll beat people because of. So things to look out for in that. And also very important, don't underestimate people just because they're not playing something you saw on the metagame discussion or something that you didn't see on my top 10 decks to look out for. A lot of times people will underestimate decks or write them off just because they're not in the top 10 decks or something, which is insane. And then they'll be mad if they lost to it. Like, how could I hit that and lose to it? Because anybody can win in the Pokemon trading card game, in any TCG, any deck, anybody, any card can win. It just has to be under the right circumstances. So don't underestimate this bottom 10%, but understand that it is there and you really can't account for it. The middle 75% is the most important. These players range from casual competitive to competitive competitive. These players are going to typically be selecting from the top 5 or so decks because they want to master an already proven to be good meta deck. They want to play a safe deck for points. They want to play a deck that gives them the best chance of showing off the things that they've learned throughout their journey so far. So these players are typically going to be selecting from the top 5-ish decks. And that's how we make up that meta game of people that are all playing the same deck. That's how we get metagames of 35% Mew VMAX or 50% Palkia V-Star at Worlds Day 1, things like that. That's how that happens. These players all fall into that category for me. Then we have the top 15% players. These are players that are either very good, or they go to every event, or they have friends that are very good, or they have coaches that are very good, or all four, or some combination of those things. These are the typically the players whose names you recognize that you don't want to play against, either because they, one, are playing a meta deck and are going to play it very well, or two, because they might have some crazy deck that you don't know how to beat. And that's what's going to make up this top 15%. I'd say about 10% of the players I consider to be up at this upper echelon will just take a meta deck and be very good at it and maybe make a couple of their own changes. And then about 5-ish%, depending on the meta game, of course, will try to just hard counter the meta and try to beat all of the stuff they think is relevant. So what can we do with this information? We can use this to help us select our deck. So looking at the 75% in the middle, this is the most important population to pay attention to. We have Salt Lake City's meta-analysis here showing those top decks. We have a recent late night event on play.limitlesstcg.com showing those top decks from July, are those most played decks, I should say. The most played decks aren't always the best decks for the event, remember. Just kind of showing, last month around Milwaukee NAIC pre-Worlds, that was the pool I was talking about that this 75% would be looking at. Arceus, Teleon, Palkia, and Teleon, Arc, Pikachu, and Mew Genesect. Back at Salt Lake, these were probably the decks that this 75% player base were looking at. Mew VMAX, Gengar VMAX, Arc Dora, and Arc and Teleon. Then we move on to the bottom 10%. These are the decks, like I was saying, that person in your friend group might say, oh my god, I can't believe I just hit blank. Could you believe that? And I lost. You'll hear that at every tournament. Yeah, every card in the Pokemon card game can be played in a deck, whether you like it or not, whether it's good or not, objectively or subjectively. But this is how these decks end up showing up to events. The two white background clips are from real life events, meta game analysis provided by RK9 Labs, and on the right is another late night event on play.limitlesstcg.com, just showing all the rogue decks, all of the funky decks, all the decks you might not even know what their cards do, that people do play to events. And on the right 15%, and I will give you a little bit of pre-metagaming for Baltimore regionals here as well in a second. The top 15%, they're going to be picking right now in Baltimore, these top players. They either want to play one of the best decks and play it better than anybody else, or they want to play a deck that beats all the top decks. Right now, a deck that I see top players going towards is Radiant Charizard and Teleon, because guess what? The deck is cracked. The deck is so good. If I knew that I was only going to play against Flying Pika and Palkia V-Star and Mew VMAX at Baltimore, I would submit my Radiant Charizard list right now. But the metagame develops, and you have to be paying attention to it if you want to perform at the top level, in my opinion. Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX is another one that top players are going to be trying to crack. Mewtwo V Union, another one that top players are going to be trying to crack right now. And I know because I'm trying to crack them. Looking at looking at the metagame that forms, Flying Pika and Palkia V Star and Mew, they're so popular. We probably should be able to find something to take advantage of that. Well, that's what that part of that 15% top player base is trying to do. Some of them will succeed and find something that they think beats all these decks. Others will just play one of the best decks and try to play it well with an optimized list. So the middle, the 75%, this population is the most important to pay attention to when metagaming for day one. Assuming that even 4 to 5 on the low end of your 9 rounds will be against these players, you can get a pretty good idea of the decks you should expect to see. Some personal examples of mine using this theory from this season, since since post-COVID Pokemon resumed. At Milwaukee, day one, I played against 4 Palkia and 2 Arceus. Out of 6 out of my 9 rounds were against the 2 top decks. At NAIC, 8 of my 9 rounds were against the 2 top decks. I can't remember at the moment what my other one was. I probably mentioned it in my tournament report, but I played against 5 Palkia and 3 Arceus in NAIC day 1. And then New Jersey, Secaucus, day 1, I played against 4 Arceus and 2 Mew. An outlier example would be at Indiana. I played Mew VMAX myself. I played against a Decidueye Beedrill, a Suicune, 2 Whimsicott, 2 Duraludon, a Sylveon VMAX, and 1 Arceus Inteleon, and I hit 0 Mew VMAX, even though I believe it was the most popular deck at the event. So there are outliers that happen, but more often than not, I do find myself falling into the average finding that I do hit what I theorize that I will hit. Milwaukee NAIC NJ, I hit 6 plus of the decks that I consider to be decks that those middle players were considering. And then looking at the higher percentage, this population can be tempting, or not the higher percentage, the one at the top of the graph, essentially, the top players, their percentage. This population can be tempting to prepare for in advance for day 2, but you do have to get to day 2. But in larger events, you can get punished more often for preparing for niche decks that have less of a chance of showing up, or at least a lesser chance of you playing them. Even if, let's pick a group of players that are really good. Isaiah Bradner, Justin Bakari, Rahul Reddy, their group has been doing really, really well since the return of events. So let's say you knew their exact 60 cards the day before the event. They've cooked up something crazy and you know their exact deck. Well, they are a group of maybe 5 to 10 friends in a 900 to 1,000 person event. So even if you have a deck that their deck loses to 100 out of 100 times, you might not play any of them, and then you might not even make it to day 2 to play against them there, and it might not even matter. So you can kind of see where this theory goes with that. You can't really prepare for those niche decks in a larger event for day 1 of the larger event and try to have a better matchup against those decks in day 2, because you still have to get to day 2. At something like Worlds or an invitational type event, it can be good to prepare for the counter to the counter to the counter, or metagame very hard and counter what everybody else is countering with their counter, because everyone's at a high level and applying the similar theories. So those counter to the counter to the counters can actually end up being the larger percentage at an invitational, a more exclusive event, or even just a very small regionals. So have you just been meta manipulated? Well, really, every time you take in more information and more people's opinions on the internet, it does influence the way you're going to look at the metagame. People talk about meta manipulation all the time. So, what's really important to me is to have your own theories like this. And if you don't like how I theorize and how I construct the meta in my head to figure out what deck I want to play, or what kind of deck I need to build, or what does my deck need to be capable of, if you don't like the way I go about it, then try to take influence from mine. Even if you're, the way you go about it's going to be nothing like mine, try to have a construct in your head of, how am I going to pick my deck. And the meta manipulation stuff, most of the time people aren't trying to purposely get you to play a bad deck, or get you to purposely not played a deck that beats theirs. It happens sometimes, but it typically is it's just funny and Twitter stuff. So you probably weren't just meta manipulated, unless I'm meta manipulating you right now and you don't even know. So I'll leave you with that. Have a great day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.